In 1873, on a dusty hill in the northwest of Turkey, a wealthy businessman with no training as an archaeologist was digging an enormous trench, and something gold caught the light. He had been searching for a city everyone told him was a fairy tale. Now, with a copy of Homer's ancient poem as his only map, he believed he had found it, the walls of Troy and the treasure of its king. He was right that the city was real. He was wrong about almost everything else. For more than 2,500 years, Troy had lived only in words. Homer's Iliad told of a great walled city on the coast, of a 10-year siege and its heroes, and the wider legend gave us the wooden horse. But no one had ever found a stone of it. To most scholars of the 19th century, Troy was like Atlantis or Camelot, a beautiful story and nothing more. Looking for it on a real map was the mark of a crank. Heinrich Schliemann was exactly that kind of crank. A German businessman who had made a fortune in dye and in war. He became consumed in middle age with proving the poem true, and he would use the Iliad itself as his guide, matching its descriptions of winds and rivers and distances to the real coastline. An English amateur named Frank Calvert had already settled on the right hill, a mound called Heinrich. Calvert owned part of it and had dug trial trenches there years before. It was he who put Schliemann onto the site. Schliemann brought the money, the workmen, and the certainty. In 1870, he began to dig. What he found was stranger than one lost city. He cut a vast trench straight down through the hill, and the hill was made of cities, layer upon layer, 9 of them, stacked like the rings of a tree, each one built on the flattened rubble of the one before, across 3,000 years of history. Somewhere in that stack was Homer's Troy. Schliemann was certain it lay near the bottom, in the oldest, deepest ruins. So he drove his trench down hard and fast to reach it. And near the bottom, in 1873, he found the gold, a hoard of it, diadems and cups, thousands of golden rings, earrings and beads. He named it, without hesitation, the Treasure of Priam, the very king who ruled Troy in Homer's war. He had his wife photographed wearing the finest pieces, calling them the jewels of Helen, the woman whose face launched the 1,000 ships. The image went around the world. The businessman had found Homer's city and dressed his wife in its queen's jewels. There was only one problem. The gold was real, but it was 1,000 years too old. The layer Schliemann had dug it from was built around 2,400 years before Christ. Homer's Troy, the city of the great siege, came 1,000 years later, and it lay not at the bottom of the hill but higher up, in a layer his workmen had already shoveled away as worthless fill. In his rush to reach Priam, Schliemann had cut his great trench straight through the real Troy and thrown much of it off the side of the hill. He had found the city he was looking for, and he had destroyed it to reach the wrong one. The gold itself then began a journey stranger than any in Homer. Schliemann had dug it out of Ottoman land, and he smuggled it out of the country in secret. It was the photograph of his wife, glittering in the jewels, that told the Turkish authorities what he had taken. The treasure went to Berlin. There it sat until the war, when it was moved to a fortified anti-aircraft tower in the city. And in 1945, the Red Army, taking Berlin, carried it back to Moscow. For 50 years, the Soviet Union swore it did not have it. Then, in 1993, Russia finally admitted it had the gold, and in 1996, it went on display behind glass in a Moscow museum. Turkey, Germany, and Russia have argued over it ever since. The Treasure of Priam has never gone home. And yet the crank had been right about the one thing that mattered. Under the fairy tale, there was stone. Heinrich is a real city, rebuilt again and again, with real walls and a real layer of burning and violent destruction at about the time Homer's war was meant to have happened. We still do not know if the siege took place as the poem tells it, but Troy was not invented. The strange thing is what it cost to prove it. The man who gave us the real Troy also smashed most of it to gravel, and modern archaeology, careful and slow, was born partly in horror at how he had worked. 150 years later, Homer is back on every screen. The same poems, the same siege, the same long journey home. The story that sent a self-taught businessman to dig a Turkish hill with a poem in his hand has lost none of its pull. Somewhere under that hill, the real Troy is still there, most of it gone forever. And in a museum in Moscow, the gold he called a king's still waits behind glass, proof that we will cross the world and break the evidence and argue for a century over a fairy tale we cannot quite let be a fairy tale.